Good morning, everyone. My name is Iris Antman, and I want to thank you for joining us in this fourth event of our Interdependence series, focusing on spiritually engaged responses to the ecological and social challenges of our world. We begin by expressing our gratitude to the land, the four directions and elements, the air, water, sun, and moon, and to the Duwamish and Salish people who have cared for this region for over 10,000 years. We can't change the colonial theft, the destruction of the environment, or the genocide that has taken place since first contact centuries ago. What we can do, though, is face this truth and move forward with wisdom, compassion, and justice. Before I introduce our featured speaker for this morning, I'd like to introduce my organizing colleagues, Jordan Van Vost of Dharma Friendship Foundation, who's my co-host today, and Ken Yasuhara of Seattle Insight Meditation Society, who is our Zoom master. We honor that it takes a considerable courage and compassion to embrace and take to heart the information we've been presenting, what it means for our lives and world, and that all of this can be quite overwhelming and distressing for people who are just not able or ready to embrace it. However, in this spirit, Dr. Joel Levey will explore a variety of profound practices and perspectives for opening our hearts and minds to embrace our current reality and future realities with deepening curiosity, courage, creative compassion, and inspiring wisdom. Joel offers a rich mix of insights from nearly 50 years of intensive Dharma studies and teaching with many respected teachers, work with hundreds of leading organizations around the globe, and pioneering work in healthcare, wellness, and human thriving. He is a founding member of Dharma Friendship Foundation and of the many Dharma centers in the Seattle area. Joel also started the first Mindfulness Center in Seattle in 1977. The Dalai Lama, an advisor on a number of the Levey's projects, once wrote in a letter to them, "You are presently engaged in work that has great prospects for bringing the Dharma, the inner sciences of human transformation, to a very wide section of people who may not, under ordinary circumstances, come into contact with these teachings. I am very pleased about the work that you are doing and send you blessings and prayers for your success." We are pleased and honored to have Dr. Joel Levey with us today. The floor is yours, Joel.
Deep bows and so many thanks, Iris, and Jordan and Ken. I've been so inspired by the program that you put together and the extraordinary timing of this. Just a deep honoring of your insight and the spirit in which you've called us all together today. I offer greetings and a deep bow from and aloha from Dorje Dechen Ling Kohala Sanctuary in the traditional lands of the Kanaka Maoli people of Hawaii. We're in the Ka'ahuhu Ahapuaha in the homeland of the King Kamehameha on the northern tip of the big island of Hawaii. And I think just to honor the earth, I'll just offer a glimpse of the view here where I am this morning, where we steward a permaculture farm and gathering place, really in the spirit that this conversation goes on. As we continue to begin, I'd like to offer a beautiful piece called The Declaration of Solemn Intent that comes from the Extinction Rebellion. And it's really, I think, a beautiful blend of the activism and the spirit of this inquiry together. The declaration says, "Let us take a moment to remember why we are here. Let's remember our love for this beautiful planet. Let us remember our love for all humanity in all corners of the world. As we act today, may we find courage to bring a sense of love and peace and appreciation to everyone we encounter, to every word we speak. We are here for all of us. We are here for all of us. So I would invite us all just to take a moment to reach up and touch our hearts, to gently smile and to brighten the light of that indwelling, mysterious, universal presence within us, that aliveness and awakeness within us. And the sense that as we brighten the light of this quality of loving, boundless presence within us in the jewel of our heart, that that light shines forth and is reflected in the deepest heart jeweled dimensions of all beings everywhere, across the vastness of dimensions of space and time. And as we gently smile and breathe and just feel the tenderness of this moment, and brighten the light of this awareness, to sense that it shines out and is reflected in the deepest heart jeweled dimension of all beings everywhere, activating within them and blessing within them their potential for awakening to this dimension of their own true being, to the light and the beauty and the power of their true being. And to hold the intention that through our explorations today, that we might come to a deeper compassion, a deeper sense of connectedness and intimacy with creation, a deeper sense of dedication to brightening the light of our true spirit in order to activate that potential within all beings. And as we do this, let us establish ourselves in the matrix of refuge and connection with everyone and everything that supports us in this noble endeavor. As though we could reach out, hold the hands of our teachers and breathe in their wisdom, their love, their strength, their inspiration, and breathe out and extend our love and gratitude to them. Let's reach out through those teachers to their teachers and sense them reaching out to their teachers and their teachers in a boundless cascade through the lineages of spiritual ancestors that we draw strength from. And as we inhale, let us gather and receive light, strength, blessings, inspiration, and radiate our gratitude through that vastness of the field of our interbeing and interconnectedness. And as we receive this inspiration, let us extend this to everyone and everything who we hold dear, who reaches to us as a source of guidance and inspiration, friendship, and love. So that there's this sense of receiving and gathering the strength and then extending and radiating it as gratitude, as blessings, upstream and downstream to the past and the future. And in this way, let us really pause for a few more moments now, just to be in a meditation on gratitude for everyone and everything we hold dear. And whatever comes to mind, let us really feel that gratitude in the deepest of ways, and then to radiate our love, our blessings, and our thanks to whoever or whatever we're grateful for. And through them to everyone and everything that has brought them into our lives, and all the forces and sources that bring that goodness to us. So each breath becomes an affirmation and a communion in the spirit of receiving and radiating, affirming our profound and deep interbeing with all things and all beings. Affirming our deep relatedness and the abundance of resources and strength and inspiration and blessings that are available to us. One of our teachers, Joanna Macy, reminds us to always begin with gratitude. And in that spirit, we wanted to begin in this way, to really, in a sense, count our blessings, to remember how profoundly resourced we are and how deeply connected we are. And Joanna reminds us that if we begin with gratitude, then that can give us the strength we need. It can give us the deep grounding in the matrix of interbeing, where we have the resources and we have the strength to then move to the second step of the work that reconnects, to honor and embrace the inconceivable suffering and grief that's present in our lives and our world. And that through embracing that, inquiring deeply into that, our wisdom eyes might open more fully and we might have greater capacity to go forth into the world with embodying the spirit of creative compassion and service. So if you're like me, there are moments in your life where you're just overwhelmed at what you see going on and what you see coming our way. And I offer, one of my hopes for today is to just offer some frameworks and some practices to just be able to stretch and open our hearts to be able to encompass this. And this profound work from Joanna Macy, I think, really gives us a map for how to navigate this territory. The great Lama and yogi Lobsang Tenzin was invited by Herb Benson to come out of his retreat in the Himalayas above Dharamsala. I think it's back in the 80s, and be a research subject at Harvard in one of Dr. Benson's studies. And Lobsang Tenzin had been in retreat more or less full time in the Himalayas. And he was asked, Genla, what is your meditation practice like? You know, how do you practice each day? And he says, I contemplate the sufferings of beings of samsara throughout all the realms of existence until I'm moved to tears. And then I know that I'm ready to begin my meditation practice. And to appreciate, you know, just the profound courage it takes just to open our hearts, to come into an empathic resonance with beings and creation, to really feel that suffering, to sit in the fire ourselves and with all beings. Joanna Macy, again, in her profound work, reminds us that this is a dark time filled with suffering and uncertainty. Like living cells in a larger body, it's natural that we feel the trauma of the world. So don't be afraid of the anguish that we feel or the anger or the fear, because these responses arise from the depth of our caring, the truth of our interconnectedness with all beings. And that our sorrow is the other face of love, for we mourn what we deeply care for. And our sorrow and grief and the rage is a measure of our humanity and our evolutionary maturity. That as our hearts break open, there is room for the world to heal. I'm reminded of a profound teaching that Michelle and I have heard from the Dalai Lama in numerous settings. Here's a picture. I was at the first Kala Chakra initiation with His Holiness in Madison, Wisconsin, here in the States. I first met him in 1978 when he first came to Seattle in the States. But one of His Holiness's teachings is that the goal of the spiritual path is essentially to be able to benefit all living beings. And in order to have the capacity to reach out, you know, like the archetype of universal compassion with infinite arms, guided by open eyes of wisdom, to be able to benefit beings through wisdom and love, that we need to perfect compassion. And that in order to perfect compassion, we need to encounter suffering. And we need to be able to find ways to open our hearts to embrace the suffering that we find around within us and in the world around us. Einstein reminds us that the world that we're experiencing reflects the level of thinking, the level of consciousness that we have had access to as a whole collectively up to this point. And it's created many problems, as we clearly see. And we shall require a substantially new manner of thinking and a substantially new level of consciousness if humanity and life on Earth as we know it is to survive. Vilma Takar, another of our teachers, reminds us that to be a spiritual in this time, to be a spiritual inquirer without a social consciousness is a luxury we can ill afford. And to be a social activist without a scientific understanding of the inner workings of the mind is the worst of folly. Neither approach in isolation has any significance. Martin Luther King reminded us that we live in a time where our spiritual power has eclipsed is not at the same level as our scientific power. And thus we have guided missiles and misguided men. And we're in danger of destroying ourselves through the use of our technology and our misguided ways of living. And Václav Havel, in his incredible address to the US Congress in 1990, in a beautiful speech said, without a global revolution in the sphere of human consciousness, nothing will change for the better in our sphere of being humans, and the catastrophe towards which the world is headed, be it ecological, social, demographic, or a general breakdown of civilization, will be unavoidable. Our salvation lies nowhere else than in the human heart, in our human power to reflect, in our human meekness and responsibility. So I've noticed over the years, I look at what's going on in the world and it's incomprehensible. There's a place in me that says, how could they be so cruel? How could people be so insensitive or greedy? How could we be destroying our habitat, our life support systems, the future for our grandchildren? And if we look at this classic wheel of life that depicts beings living constellated in different realms of consciousness, it actually makes sense. If we look at what's going on in the world, what we see actually makes sense. That beings whose minds are dominated by greed and addictive tendencies want to grasp and hoard and be greedy and have more and more and more and are never satisfied. That beings whose consciousness is constellated like a god are just overinflated with pride. That some beings live in dullness, that others live in fear, that others live with jealousy and aggression. And these are just because we don't know who we are. At the center are symbols of fundamental ignorance that's out of touch with the way things are. That gives rise to grasping at and wanting to possess and have and wanting to push away and dominate and destroy. And that, from this context, the contemplative practices that many of us have been studying together with various teachers and various traditions make perfect sense. And in this world as an alternative to the sufferings of samsara and the realms of confusion. This whole idea of compassion is based on a deep recognition that all life and all beings are interconnected and involved with each other. And as one of our teachers, Brother David Stendelras, says, ethics is how we behave when we really recognize that we belong together. So to appreciate, there are different streams of information flowing in our lives and world right now. And for some reason, which we'll explore a bit here, many people just don't have the capacity or the willingness to explore the true nature of reality. It can be just overwhelming to deal with the complexity and the grief that comes with that. and to appreciate that mindfulness is not for the faint-hearted. Many people started and got their zafus and their practices and set up their little altars, and over time just returned to shopping and drinking beer and having Zen decor. It really takes a tremendous amount of courage just to look deeply at what's going on, to bear witness to that, and to embrace the realities of our lives and world. This is a profound model that was shared by and brought forth by Otto Scharmer and ULab and the Presencing Institute, which shows basically two loops. There's the loop of being receptive to download what's going on, to see and sense deeply and clearly, to be deeply, deeply present in the deepest dimensions of our being, and to integrate that awareness and to work with it and to co-create together to create a better world. But there's also a tendency towards denial and shutting down and closing our minds and our hearts and imploding into fear and blaming others and acting out in violent, self-destructive and destructive to the world kinds of ways. And that both of these are at play in our lives and world right now. And I really rejoice that models like this and practices like this are being brought into, you know, large programs with hundreds of thousands of people around the world that have been participating in some of the ULab programs. So this is very much at the heart and core of a lot of the leading head of leadership, development, creativity in our world these days. I was touched by this tweet from Greta Thunberg I think earlier this week or last week, where she was talking about the John Kerry saying we're going to reduce half of the emissions will come from future technology. And Greta says, yeah, great news. I spoke to Harry Potter and he says he will team up with Gandalf and Sherlock Holmes and the Avengers and we'll get started on this right away. And this reflects this kind of sentiment that Van Jones offers here, you know, who was an advisor to Obama on green jobs and enterprise when Obama was in the White House. And Van says, you know, I've been with all these world leaders and they don't know what to do. You think you're scared, you think you're terrified. They have all the intelligence of the Pentagon and the research reports, and they still don't know what to do. They're terrified to do anything because they might lose their position. So they keep juggling chickens and chainsaws and hope it will work. There was a research study by the conference board at one point, speaking about the crisis in leadership. And it said that 2/3 of the leaders rated themselves as highly confident, very confident, yet the HR professionals who worked with them only evaluated 1/3 of those leaders as being highly competent to deal with VUCA times of great volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So to appreciate a huge amount of what we're dealing with here is a crisis in consciousness and a crisis in leadership. And this Adam Frank has done some brilliant work. He was just in a Varela symposium with the Upaya Institute and shared this study where he wrote about, is coronavirus a fire drill for the planet's future with regards to climate change? And I shared this with Michelle, my beloved partner here. And she said, yeah, if COVID is a fire drill for the climate crisis, we'll all be toast. If we look at how global leaders have responded, we're trying, but the depth of wisdom that we need is so great. So yes, be sure to wash your hands and all will be well with regards to COVID. But then there's the waves of the recession and the impacts and implications of that social justice. There's climate change coming, biodiversity loss, social unrest. You know, our need to find greater wisdom, greater compassion to respond to these challenges is just immense. So climate disruption has arrived. It is here. I think we've crossed the line in the last year where it's not really a debate if it's happening. It's just a debate of how we respond to it. Respond to having millions and millions, if not billions, of climate refugees and the social unrest that comes with that. European strategy and policy analysis says if we do not keep temperature increases below 1.5 degrees, we're headed towards extinction later this century. There was one scientist warning with 11,000 scientists signing it, saying that we're clearly and unequivocally facing a climate emergency. Some of us on this call recently signed on as 500 scholars and academics, calling for a more robust response of global leaders for responding to climate change swiftly. And it's not just in science, the militaries of the world see this coming and are scrambling to pull it together, knowing that these factors are coming our way. So it's not just conservative groups or scientific groups. This was a slide shared by Kriti in her previous session here, where we look at where we want to end up is in a pathway that will lead us to keep global temperatures below 1.5 degrees centigrade, or at the most maybe 2 degrees, which could still be cataclysmic. But existing pledges put us at 2.6 to 3.2 degrees, current policies at over 3 degrees. And if we don't do anything at all, we're up to 4, almost 5 degrees centigrade, which is just unimaginable amount of suffering. And I found this one diagram just extremely potent to just conceive of the massive shift in consciousness, the massive call for deeper wisdom and deeper collaboration and deeper care for ourselves and each other and this planet, and the huge gap that we face here and the challenges that we face. It's pretty clear that of many of the tipping points, we've crossed many of those, and the direction that we're heading is one of just tremendous suffering to come. And it's already arrived as we look around. Just what happened in Texas in the last year, and in California with the fires, and in Central America and Australia and countless other places. If you're interested in understanding the feedback loops in a deeper way, this series of videos that was produced to support a Mind and Life series on consciousness and the climate was really a profound glimpse of the way that the feedback loops work. So I encourage you to take a look at that. We're anticipating huge food shortages. I think the idea of eating meat in the future is as inconceivably unsustainable as many of the other things that we will have to let go of, given how much food goes into raising animals for consumption. So I think as people involved in contemplative work, if that's a step that you haven't taken to reduce or to stop eating animals, that's certainly a step in the direction of solutions that we can take, and certainly an embodiment of compassion. This week, the International Energy Agency declared basically that this is the end of fossil fuel expansion, that it simply makes no sense economically or ecologically going into the future. How long it will take for this to actually land in policy and leadership, who knows, but that was a step. And this one struck me as a segment in Democracy Now!, I think earlier this week, speaking about the potential for sea level rise by the year 2300 of 33 feet. Just envision that where you are. That would be twice as tall as our house here. Imagine that, many of you are in Seattle, on the shores of Seattle and Harbor Island. Here we are in Hawaii, I'm thinking of the coastline here, and that's a lot. So how many millions, if not billions of people could be displaced by that? So there's great work for us to do, and the contemplative practices really give us some ways to work with this. I think, to be humbled by appreciating just the social injustice of the carbon footprints of developing countries and how deeply the developed countries and how deeply the third world countries are suffering due to the kinds of lifestyles and habits and privilege that we've all experienced, for generations in our Western cultures. So changes are coming. And I think just one last piece of data and perspective here. This really came into my meditations deeply a number of months ago when I ran across this, just talking about the extreme dangers or to our health and sustainability. If temperatures even get into the 90s or up to 100, and the humidity is high, that basically we enter into climates that are actually dangerous for people to live. Where, and just think of all of the people in the Southwest United States and the Southern world around the equator with high humidity and high temperatures, and how just extremely dangerous those zones are going to be for human habitation, let alone for one species dying off in the planet every 7 or 8 minutes at this point. A friend of ours, Glenn Albrecht, coined this term soulstalgia. It's kind of a reflection of the word soulophilia, which is the love and responsibility for place, for a bioregion, for planet, the unity of all interrelated interests in that place. And soulstalgia is the kind of suffering and pain and homesickness that we feel while we're still at home. And many of us have seen this as we've watched our forests where we live burn. We go snorkeling here in some of our favorite places, and watching the coral die off in the last few years has just been heartbreaking. People in the Arctic and Africa and Asia, throughout the world, seeing, places that were really natural areas that were really precious to them or that sustained them and their families for generations and generations, wasting away. So to just appreciate the incredible suffering and grief that comes from this kind of deep soulstalgia and homesickness for a home that we're still living in that no longer exists in the old way. Would like to just share a couple perspectives here just with regards to Indigenous views on the climate crisis. The crisis that we're facing as a species, as a globe, is not actually a climate change. We're simply fallen out of right relations with the earth. We belong to nature and the people, as a people who, instead of caretaking the earth and seeing the earth as our relative or as our mother, we prey upon the earth, said Vine Deloria. It's a deeply respected leader in the First Nations communities here in the States. There was a piece by Charles Eisenstein recently where he was talking about a woman who had met an Indigenous leader who had come into an area in Northern California, and he said, you better do ceremonies regularly in this place, or there's going to be serious fires. And nobody did ceremonies. And the next year there were forest fires. And he came back again and he repeated, look, you've got to do ceremonies here or the fires will become even worse. And the next year, the fires were worse. And he came a third time and he said, do the ceremonies or this part of the world will be devastated. Soon after that, the campfire in California came through that region, destroying whole cities. Later, a woman found out that the spot that this medicine person was speaking of had been the place of a genocidal massacre in the past, killing all the indigenous people who lived there. And that there's a sense that somehow he was able to perceive that. And in his understanding, the horrifying trauma that had taken place there had affected the land in addition to the human beings. And it was out of balance and unable to maintain harmony until it was healed through appropriate ceremonies. So to appreciate, what we're seeing is climate change, there's many different layers of this. Even the Dalai Lama has been unique amongst all of the other Dalai Lamas before him, in that at a very early age, the Dalai Lama started doing Kala Chakra empowerments and initiations in different places around the world. It's called the World Peace Initiation or Blessing. But the whole goal of the Kala Chakra, other than, blessing and elevating people's consciousness, is to harmonize and balance the inner energies and the outer energies of the world out of great wisdom and great compassion. And he's gone to DC, to New York City, to dozens and dozens of places around the world, and offered this teaching. And I think at some level, it's part of the Dalai Lama's work to harmonize and balance not just the minds of people, but to also harmonize the balance the energies of the earth. The Royal College of Psychiatrists just released this statement in this past week, speaking to the profound relationship of climate change being a health emergency, and calling for global leaders to just take this to heart, to reduce the suffering that is coming our way, to really honor the fact that this is here and we need to do something really significant to respond. So as Dina said, there are those trying to set fire to the world. We are in danger. There is no time now not to love. So just take a moment to just embrace and feel the impact of what we've touched on so far. The preciousness of this self-organizing, living system that we call Gaia, Earth, Pachamama, home, and the assault that it's under. And the great potential within each of our hearts and minds to bring forth the kind of creative compassion guided by wisdom, to move things back towards greater harmony and balance, to respond to the challenges of these times with greater wisdom and love. To appreciate that if a living system is suffering from ill health, the remedy is found by connecting us with more of ourselves, not pulling away, not isolating out of fear, not othering, but by moving towards interbeing, interdependence, really feeling and participating in the intimacy of our lives together. The sense that we're all, like it says in the Bible, and it says in Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, how wonderful it would be if all beings experience each other as limbs on the one body of life. It's interesting to consider that the word mindfulness comes from actually was translated by an Anglican, an angel, an Anglican who was looking for a word to translate the word sati. And he thought about this phrase in an Anglican prayer that says, always be mindful of the needs of others. That's where the word mindful comes from. It's from an Anglican prayer book. And to appreciate that empathy, if you really look at it, has to do with being present. And being so present that we come into a sense of attunement and resonance with the people we're with, the animals that we're with, the biosphere that we're in, the world that we live in, and then coming to a sense of safety and trust with that. But honestly, empathy in itself can be overwhelming. And as we feel the distress in other people and the planet, when we feel the suffering and the pain of the world, if we don't move from empathic resonance, we can move into empathic distress. And if we move into empathic distress, we can be overwhelmed by the suffering that we feel. So that the part of the wisdom of the contemplative teachings is this constantly moving us towards compassion. And there isn't such a thing as compassion fatigue, but there is empathy fatigue. We can be overwhelmed by feeling the suffering in the world. But the remedy to what has been mislabeled as compassion fatigue, which is actually empathic distress, the remedy to that is to move towards compassion, which is engagement, which is reaching out with kindness, sending an emoji, sweet emoji to somebody, signing a petition, stepping in front of a tank, going out in your kayak, radiating loving kindness. Compassion is engagement. And to appreciate the parts of our brain that light up when we're in pain ourselves are right next to the parts of our brain that light up when we're in the presence of the suffering of other beings. And that some deep, visceral, somatic level, our experience of the suffering of others is indistinguishable from our experience of our own suffering and pain. But when we move to compassion, when we move to engagement to reduce that suffering, to embrace it with loving kindness and care, then we activate different circuitry in the brain, different neural pathways, and the compassion actually protects us from the overwhelm and the distress of our empathic resonance with the suffering of the world. So in the Sea Care program at Stanford, they've brought in a lot of deep contemplative practices, most of which come out of the Buddhist tradition via Thupten Jinpa, the Dalai Lama's translator. And one of the core practices there is to look at the people here on the screen, or envision doing this as you walk down the street and go, just like me, Ken wants to be happy. And Iris wants to be healthy, and this person wants to be safe and at ease, and to start to retune our consciousness as we conceive of and perceive other beings to go, just like me, these beings are vulnerable and suffering and filled with incredible potential and light. And to move from that recognition then into metta and karuna, may this person, may these beings be healthy and happy, safe and at ease, free from anxiety and suffering. May I respond to them with kindness and care. If they're hungry, may I feed them. If they're lonely, may I smile to them. If they have a need and I have a resource, may I deliver that. And if nothing else, may I just bless them by the way I hold them in my heart and my consciousness. As Archbishop Desmond Tutu, the Dalai Lama's favorite playmate and beloved friend, says, compassion is not just feeling with someone, but seeking to change the situation. Frequently, people think that compassion and love are merely sentimental, but no, they're demanding. If you're going to be compassionate, be prepared for action, for engagement. And back to the Dalai Lama's comments that I mentioned at the beginning of the session. If we are to develop our capacity to benefit all beings and to fully awaken, the vehicle to do that is to perfect compassion. And to perfect compassion, to open our hearts, like Einstein says, to widen the circle of our compassion, to embrace all living beings and the whole of nature and all of its beauty, how can we widen that circle of our compassion to embrace all beings? How can we activate our inner Kuan Yin, our inner Avalokiteshvara, Chenrezi, the archetype of infinite compassion, who hears the cries of the world and reaches out in countless ways through our actions, through our speech, through our media posts, through our words and our prayers, to bring relief, to bring resources, to bring help to all beings. How can we activate this potential within ourselves? So I'd like to share a few other practices that I think are really helpful. One is to be mindful of where our mind goes and how we constellate the creative activity of our mind. One of our teachers, David Chetlahay Paladin, was an incredible Navajo teacher who I used to spend a week with every year. David used to laugh and say, "Worrying's just praying backwards." And it kind of ties into that old adage of, which wolf are you feeding? Are you feeding the wolf of fear and anxiety and overwhelm? Or are you feeding the wolf, the mind, the tendency, the heart of great connection and great compassion? How do we work with these unruly energies of our mind? From a scientific perspective, how do we make our nervous system our ally instead of our enemy? Just moment to moment, as we watch our minds, as we watch our hearts, can we move towards openness rather than constriction? Another way of working with these times is to either find whatever ethical principles and codes that we might choose to live by. It may be the 5 mindfulness precepts, which essentially are framed as aware of the suffering caused by mindless habits and our ignorance. We deeply aspire to live in the world as a force for good. And there's the 5 classic ones, but oftentimes with our friends and students who study with us, we encourage people to write their own. And there's this beautiful set of eco-sattva vows that Joanna Macy worked up with the One Earth Sangha. That I'll just maybe just read these with me and just feel the potency of what it might be like to live these as mindfulness precepts that help you again and again just reflect, how am I doing? Am I on track or am I off track with these? So together, if you like, based on my love of the world and understanding of deep interdependence of all things and beings, I deeply aspire, as a way to understand the word vow. I deeply, deeply aspire to live on the earth more lightly and less violently with regards to food, products, energy I consume. To commit myself to daily healing of the world and the welfare of beings, to discern and replace human systems of oppression and harm with kindness, to invite personal discomfort as an opportunity to share in the challenges, to share in the sufferings of collective liberation, to draw inspiration, strength, and guidance from the living earth, to take refuge in that matrix of goodness and aliveness and regenerativity, to gather that from our ancestors and from future generations and for our siblings of all species, to help others in their work for the world and to ask for help when I need it, and to pursue some form of daily spiritual practice, contemplative practice, that clarifies our mind, strengthens our heart, and supports me in observing and staying true to these deep and noble aspirations. So my invitation for you would be to potentially take these to heart and write your own. To really appreciate that those with a more sacred view, a sense of interdependence, of living systems, will be more capable to keep our heads above the water, like in the Hopi prophecy, where it says, that that there will be those that are overwhelmed in these times and will cling to the shore, push out into the shore. Keep your head above the water, see who is there with you and rejoice. This could be a good time, even though there is great suffering. So can we frame our lives in a larger context? Where do we take refuge? Where do we draw strength from? Do we take it from our Facebook feeds and our Netflix movies? Do we take it from shopping, or do we let ourselves reach down into the earth and up into the heavens and into the many dimensions of our being? Do we reach out and hold the hands of our teachers who hold the hands of their teachers who hold the hands of their teachers, and feel ourselves connected with lineages of spiritual ancestors and strength and goodness that we're embedded within, that we can draw strength and inspiration and blessings from, so that we always are resourced to let our heart be broken open even more, that the tears of our grief can become fuel for our transformation and compost to grow a beautiful garden that can nourish and feed other beings. To me, one of the absolutely most useful practices in this regard is the practice of Tonglen, which is a core practice in the Bodhisattva tradition of the Buddhist path. And we've learned so many versions of this from so many teachers, but one of the beautiful aspects of the practice of Tonglen, which is this capacity not only to reach out and breathe in light and strength and beauty and radiate gratitude and love to all beings, the practice of Tonglen teaches us that we can breathe in and gather all the compost, all the suffering and pain and fear and tension within us and within the larger body of life that we share, that we can actually, as we breathe, gather that into our true heart, gather that into some quantum dimension of profound capacity for transformation, where those energies are dissolved and resolved, opening our hearts to then be a radiant source of blessings and compassion and strength, metta and karuna, loving kindness and compassion. And the teachings we've received on Tonglen are that essentially that from the moment that we've first glimpsed that we can have the capacity for this, maybe as a young mother or a father holding an infant who's crying and afraid in your arms, and the natural wish to just breathe in their suffering and their fear and give them all your love and strength at such an organic level, that from the moment that we glimpse that we might have the capacity to do this, and we start to practice and cultivate our capacity to breathe in the suffering within us or around us, to let it dissolve into the purity of our true heart, and to radiate loving kindness and compassion as waves of light and blessings and strength to the individuals or the groups of beings or all beings. That from the moment we glimpse that and we practice and we practice and we practice, it's said that the capacity for engaging in Tonglen grows and grows and grows until, upon becoming fully awakened to our true nature and higher potential, that the actual mode of an enlightened being is Tonglen. That in a sense, that's all that's left, is this selfless vortex of transformation, gathering the entropy and the suffering and the pain and the imbalance and tension in the world into our hearts, and then breathing out in ways that bring harmony and balance and stabilization and comfort, protection to beings. So envision what it might be like just to let the suffering that we encounter, let the grief and the fear and the anxiety that we feel within us bring us into resonance with those anxieties, those fears, that grief and trauma in all the cells of the larger body of life. And to gradually develop our capacity to gather more and more compost, that the abundance of the garden of our awakening heart might be a source of comfort and nourishment for all beings. Another really profound practice that has come so alive in our meditation circle and Sangha during this time is practices for those who have died. If we stop and consider, 3.4 million people have died of COVID so far, but 25,000 people die of starvation every day on this planet, even though half of the food that we raise and that we grow and that we package is thrown away and wasted. 9 million people a year die. And the animals that die for food each day is inconceivable. This is the count in the United States of the number of animals that have been killed in the food industry thus far this year: 21,277,335,000,000 and 510 animals from the time I downloaded this. It's the number of creatures who've died because of the food industries. Some of that collateral damage if you look at the fishing industries. So a practice that we learned from Chakdud Rinpoche for those who have died goes like this, and please join me in this. Perhaps think of someone you know who's died recently. 2 people we know died yesterday. So it's kind of tender and close at heart. But just think of individuals who've died who you are close to, or people you know of, or the numbers and statistics here or that you've read of. And holding a sense of tenderness in your heart, call forth and envision in the space above and before you some spiritual being of light, however you conceive of them. It could be Jesus or Mary, it could be Kuan Yin or Tara or the Dalai Lama, or just a being of light. And on behalf of those who have died recently, your heart reaches out to this being of light on their behalf, touches the heart of this being of light. Their heart opens and shines waves of light like sunbeams flowing through the clouds into the subtle bodies of those who have died, comforting them, bringing them to peace, dissolving their fears and confusion, dissolving any karmic tensions and unresolved traumas and negative karma embedded within the continuum of their consciousness, and dissolving them into a sphere of light and spiritual vibrancy. And then those beings are drawn up in the spheres of light, on those rays of light, into the heart of this great being of light, and delivered into a realm of absolute peace and purity and goodness and infinite potential for spiritual awakening. And just appreciate how in those moments of empathic resonance, or those moments where we might be reading on Google News about how many people died here, who was shot in the back of the head at a traffic stop, or whatever it may be, instead of just being an observer or a voyeur of all the deaths and all the statistics, that every time we hear of someone who's died or a group of beings who've died, we just pause for a moment and activate our capacity to engage with that in a helpful way. Instead of just grieving the lives of people and beings who've died and feeling helpless, to appreciate this is a practice you can do that, if nothing else, will open your heart to a deeper sense of interdependence and interrelatedness and compassion. Another practice that comes from Sensanim in the Korean Zen tradition is, as we breathe in, to just use a gata, if you will, breathing in, saying to yourself, clear mind, clear mind, clear mind. And as you breathe out, don't know. Clear mind, clear mind, clear mind. Don't know. Just within that clarity, that just gather whatever you see and sense and think and feel. And then just with the don't know, just go through the edges and the boundaries of that into the openness and the emptiness and the vastness and the interdependence of what's going on. To make peace with the inconceivability of what our experience is and the true nature of things, and to just find a greater equanimity and balance within that, that can allow our metta and karuna, our compassion and our kindness and our intuitive wisdom to flow out of that place where we're comfortable with that, with not knowing, rather than just freaking out about it. Another strategy we can use just to embrace the overwhelming craziness of these times is to find community, to build sangha, to build the beloved community. These are some photos that moisten my heart to just think of who are the spiritual allies, the spiritual friends that you share the journey with. And to appreciate that no matter how this ride unfolds for us on this planet, how important community is going to be to find strength, to find perspective. We hosted Bob Stilger, who's many of you may know him, activist, Dharma friend, spent a lot of his life in Japan, wrote a book called After Now on how to deal with crisis. Lives in Spokane. Thank you. My beloved Michelle is here with me and helps me remember when I can't quite put the pieces together. But Bob came and stayed with us in Hawaii after he had been working in Fukushima Prefecture a number of years ago. And we asked, could we invite people in the community here? Because a lot of people in Hawaii here were afraid of the fallout and the radiation coming our way through the atmosphere and through the oceans. Had a lot of fear. How frightened should we be? And since Bob had been there, he offered to do a talk with the community. And at the end of that talk, people realized that the question was not how scared should we be? But Bob basically pointed out, look, if it's not a nuclear meltdown or a climate crisis or a hurricane or a storm or a flood or an earthquake or an economic meltdown, it's going to be something that's going to blow through your community. And the one thing that you'll have to rely upon when those challenges come is how close is your network of support, your circle of friends, colleagues, allies, the people you sing with and pray with, your ohana, as we'd say here in Hawaii, the people you share food with. So, during COVID, we've been sitting together with people 4 times a week online, and the intimacy of the Sangha that has developed through that sitting together has just been mind-blowing and a tremendous lifeline for many of us who've been involved with that. So moving toward the end here, Joanna Macy offers 3 sensible responses to living in profoundly disruptive times that really make sense. The first is the category of actions we take to get in the way and slow down the damage. Jordan, bless you for going out in your kayak, and other people for our boycotts and standing up and slowing down the damage that's being done. And bless us for everything we're trying to do to understand the dynamics of the system and create new wise alternatives and forms and systems and structures and ways of living that are more aligned with the way things are, more in harmony, more sustainable. And the third category, which comes back to the contemplative practices that we're exploring here, is to do whatever we can to deepen our wisdom and our creative compassion, to raise consciousness, to become an embodied force for good in the world. So as Joanna, as we started off with, to begin with gratitude that helps us to honor and embrace our suffering and pain and grief for the world and see with new, more open wisdom eyes and go forth in wiser, more helpful, more courageous, and more helpful ways. This is the work that reconnects. This is the work of these times. I'll just touch this really briefly. From the deep adaptation work, there's 5 questions that they invite people to explore. What do we need? Renunciation, what do we need to stop doing in order not to make things worse? Reconciliation, where and how can we make peace where things have been disrupted or out of balance, where we can awaken to a greater sense of mutual support? What can we restore? What old ways, wisdom ways might we bring back into our lives, our world, our society that make sense? What do we most value and want to preserve that will build our resilience and help us thrive in the midst of whatever challenges we face? And what kind of radical hope can we find when all of the frames of reference that we've relied upon have fallen away? Where then do we take our stand for living in a way that is true to spirit and for the benefit of all beings? So we've got some time to reflect together and explore. And I invite us for a few moments to come back and touch our tender hearts, to gently smile. And as we breathe, to just feel and sense all the sensations and vibrations, thoughts and images and feelings that are flowing to us and through us in this moment. To really embrace what has been touched in this exploration together and what is alive within you now, and to honor that and embrace that. To let your eyes and your heart be moistened. To let the tenderness within your heart shine forth as a light that brings that light of tenderness, of kindness, of metta and karuna to reflect in the deepest hearts of all beings everywhere. To realize that as we open our hearts to ourselves with greater mercy and compassion, may all beings find greater mercy and compassion, metta and karuna in their hearts as well. I invite you to just bring forth any questions, any reflections. Give voice to anything you'd like to just honor and give voice to in this moment.
Joel, I would just like to thank you so deeply for your offerings, and you certainly awakened in my heart and mind innumerable feelings and opportunities for reflection, and pointing to the importance of Sangha cannot be overstated. So thank you for that. And you can put your questions either in the chat or you can raise a digital hand, and we would love to hear from you.
Yeah, while we're waiting for questions, I'll just echo what Iris just said. Thank you so much, Joel. I feel like we have so much to be grateful for. so much so much suffering to open to, and so much work to do, and also, depending on where you're at, so much work to stop doing and undo and just be present. And we're each going to find our own balance point. That's the practice. Yeah, just if you don't have a question, I invite you to share too. This isn't necessarily questions can come out once we start talking, so please feel free to dive in and share your heart's wisdom with us.
And you can feel free to speak up or to just put any reflections in the chat. I also put in a few links to just stay in touch and follow up if anybody's interested. Those are in the chat as well.
Yes, Karen, go ahead.
Yes, so Joel, Michelle, so good to see you too. Through our grief and despair and anger over the state of things, I'm jumped into the political sphere again. I'm running for city council again. Damn. For those of you who don't know me, Karen Guzak, I was the mayor of the city of Snohomish for 7 years, and then have taken some time off and have been sewing a lot of bags out of repurposed fabrics, making things that are beautiful so we don't have to use so many plastic bags. So it's a strange and compulsive endeavor, but I've been inspired so often by Joel and Michelle and your teachings and your love and your reaching out, and to this group here. Thank you all for showing up today, and just want to let you know, Joel and Michelle, what I'm up to.
Fantastic. Yeah, Karen, yeah, we so celebrate you, Karen. We've told stories about you all over the world as we've traveled and taught, of just an archetype of kind of a blazing bodhisattva, compassionate politician, so yeah, and a contemplative artist, just so deep bows to you, dear heart. So good to have you here.
So there's a question in the chat from Michael. What part do you believe fear of full embodiment plays into this split with nature?
Wow. Beautifully put, Michael. In the last session, Kriti talked about, the incredible, overwhelming amount of trauma that people have experienced, and how people who've been traumatized in various ways have just shut down their capacity for living fully in their bodies, of being resonant with others in their environment, and how that just ripples on for generation after generation. So to find whatever ways we can to just come back into the wilderness and the tenderness of our embodiment, and to realize that our spirituality isn't in some etheric, disembodied realm, but it's fully integrated with the feelings and the energies in our bodies. So I think the less in touch we are with our bodies, the less in touch we are with our bodies, with the world, with the nature around us, and the more fully we come to inhabit our own many-dimensional embodiment, then the more capable we are of really, really deeply touching and being touched by the earth and the energies of the earth. And I think, one of the huge crises of these times is people are so out of touch with their own bodies that they're not in touch with the suffering they're inflicting upon themselves, and therefore we continue to share that suffering and inflict it upon other bodies and upon the earth. So yeah, deep bows to you for the work you're doing, Michael. So good to have you here.
Anyone else? Yes, Gordon, if you want to unmute yourself.
I did. Thanks. I have a reflection and a question. First, I'll share the reflection. I lead a lot of trips into the natural world to study and learn about it, and also to share that. And I think that's part of what drives me to the natural world, is that I can share it with other people and introduce them to it. We went to a place that was really a major burn area this last year. And what I was struck by was, first of all, how incredibly powerful the energy that a burn has on a system, that there were these almost cavernous slumps in places where huge trees had been just burned right underneath. And it just made me realize what a strong insult that is to a system that's been around for a long time. This is a burn system. I mean, it's a system that survives by burns, but still having a burn of that intensity is really devastating. But I realized also that a lot of the plants were coming back. And I think that even though many of them will take a long time, it was amazing how much ground cover there was of things that you usually see as trees, but there they are growing as look like little plants and in huge abundance. And so nature responds to insults by attempting to come back. And I mean, I wonder how much diversity they have in their skill set. I mean, I don't think of them that way usually, but just realizing that we can learn, I think, from that by seeing the different strategies that the natural world has to come back from tremendous insults, and which we're going to have more and more. So that was my reflection. And my question was, when I saw the facts arrayed before me, you just blasted us with a lot of information. And I wondered, because I believe that information has power, but when we're speaking to people, I think, that believe a lot of this already. But when we go to people that don't believe it, and we have to some extent, try to convey, I'm just wondering what the best approach is, what ideas you have about that, because these folks are uh, unenlightened at this point. We're all unenlightened, but these folks are I use the word ignorant. I don't like using that word, and I've been hammered for it, but they are. They need better information. They need to have their information challenged.
Yeah. Thank you, Gordy. I so resonated with your comments about the burn. I remember an area that we used to hike in Tennessee Valley in California that had burned. And we cycle through there every 3 months or so over a number of years, and just seeing the regenerative capacity of nature was profound. So as you're speaking, I think of an old story that Ram Dass used to tell of a woman who had been in India with him and came back to a little town in Saskatchewan. And she wrote a letter to Ram Dass and said, when people here hate me when I'm a Buddhist, but they love me when I'm a Buddha. And I think, at some level, with the people that that we like to just open their hearts and minds a little bit, preaching the gospel and sharing the data about climate change and being an environmentalist or whatever, maybe it isn't going to be so useful as just being a respectful, kind, and loving, inspiring presence in their life, where we build some trust and some rapport, and we're able to just ask a wise question now and then and engage in some dialogue and slowly nudge them toward, a deeper consideration of what they like to see in the world for their grandchildren or whatever it may be. So, the data can be manipulated, as we've so seen, statistics and the legal system can be used to oppress people and to liberate them. But building relationship and rapport and kindness is a really beautiful way in, and then sourcing our guidance with that. And Gordy, since you actively lead hikes with mountaineers and other groups, if you'd like to put your contact info in the chat here, if anybody would like to go for a hike with you, that could be a beautiful thing. Gordy's been one of our most consistent participants in our 4 times a week meditation group, and is a dear soul.
Thank you.
Steve, looks like you've got a hand up.
Yeah, thank you. An area I just wondered if you could respond to, in a sense, it's sort of what you've been weaving this entire time, but, you know, for me on the path, I mean, as, you know, practice and grow, as it develops, I kind of feel like I'm, you know, seeing through conventional reality more. I sort of see things in terms of big world systems and other dimensions and all that. And so there's one way at which it almost, and I'm very informed. I used to be a journalist for 30 years. I'm really informed, and I don't know how to tread that path because there's an element of oppositional status or positioning you have to take to be an activist, which is why I've never been a very good activist, because being a journalist meant getting inside the heads of everyone on every side, and that's sort of what I instinctively do. But on the other hand, I don't want to be paralyzed. I want to participate in helping pull the planet back. It's like kind of these different vectors. There's like this big cosmology thing. There's seeing empathy with everybody, but on the other hand, there's also a need for action. It seems like you and Michelle kind of tread that path rather elegantly, but I'm not quite sure, in a sense, from what you said, if you could say how you do that to see how I can do it better. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Steve. What a gift to share this long journey with you, brother. I really celebrate all the
Truly.
decades that we've been in this circle together, and your really beautiful positioning, you know, as a bridge between the contemplative community and really the mainstream community as well, which is certainly a space that we've occupied. What comes to mind is just the power of sitting and sourcing the guidance and knowing when it's time to get off the cushion and go out and join an action, or cut your hair and put on your appropriate attire and go out there into the halls of power and just be a blazing bodhisattva in those realms. Or, you know, so I think, you know, really, really learning how to be in the stillness and know when it's time to be still and go deeper and find a greater wisdom, or just shine a brighter light and do the activism through your dedications at a more quantum level. And when it's time to write a letter or show up and put your body on the line and suffer the consequences of that for the greater good. So I think it really comes out of the sitting and the stillness, and more than anything out of the bodhisattva aspiration, you know, our deep, deep, deep dedication to awaken as fully as we possibly can in order to be able to be effective at being a force for good in the world. That, you know, to wake up with that intention in the morning, to go to bed with that at night, to be able to sit in the stillness and source the guidance we need, I think is really how I'd respond to that.
And just for one more thought, it does seem like the sort of a key to, you know, recognize the Buddha nature of all those persons, even despite how they may be acting. I worked on that really hard during the last 4 years of the prior administration. And and we sort of have to do that. That's what the Dalai Lama does. He never demonizes the trainees or leaders, or he just doesn't. So I think that's part of how we weave this.
You know, there's a practice, I didn't mention it, but there's a practice of guru yoga. There's a practice of merging our hearts and minds with our teachers. And, you know, to bring the Dalai Lama's spirit into your spirit, to merge your heart and mind with the Dalai Lama or Desmond Tutu or Karen Guzak or Michelle, or, you know, and Michelle says,
and act from that place.
Yeah. That we can really merge our hearts and minds with our teachers, and to appreciate that in that lineage of practice that our teachers then have merged their hearts and minds with their teachers, who have merged their hearts and minds with their teachers, who have merged their hearts and minds with their teachers. So that even though we may feel totally inadequate for being able to wisely, effectively, powerfully, skillfully respond, we can, you know, in a sense, just merge our hearts and minds with whoever it is who might have the wisdom. And then as that integrates into our own mind stream, see how that moves us and guides us. Jordan?
Yeah, I just have a little practical experience to share from my bumbling attempts to answer my own way of responding to some of these questions about how to respond appropriately, which I've heard is really the essence of our Buddhist practice, or any practice, is an appropriate response. And just over the years, I've done a lot of public comment at the city council, or the port commission, and I'm realizing, when I coming from a place of centeredness, and as Steve said, recognizing everybody's Buddha nature, not demonizing anybody, really trying to connect to them in a non-oppositional way. It's Yangtze Rinpoche said in the first event in this series, if we're coming from a place of I'm right and you're wrong, then that's the wrong approach. We have to see how we're all struggling to find a peaceful solution to the world, and everybody's dealing with their own load of suffering and trauma. And if we come from a place of love, that's where we have to do the practice. So and it's we make mistakes, but if you're willing to go out and test yourself, and that's where the growth is going to happen.
Beautiful, thank you. I noticed that Ziwa's got his hand up. I'd love to hear from him, and also encourage everybody to show up for his presentation, which is the next one in this series. I've been so inspired by your work, and really celebrate that you're here today. And I'm thinking, after we hear from Ziwa, the potential, if we could take a few minutes and just hear a jewel from each person, or as many voices as we can, just something that's been meaningful from this time, and then take that into a dedication, then we'll stay fairly close to our temporal envelope here. So Jiwa, please let us hear your voice.
Yeah, this is a fruitful and important conversation that we're having in the last 10 minutes or so. And I spent most of my adult life in the conflict arena, advocating in federal forums for wildlife. What I wanted to share is actually, and this is getting back to Gordon's question, one of my heroes in the world is William Ury, URY, from Harvard School of Negotiation, who is on the front line of like the world's most difficult and intractable problems. And he wrote a book called Difficult Conversations. And what he's basically saying there is that arguing doesn't work. Arguing never works. And that's what we get drawn into, right? And he very helpfully points out in different sort of contexts how if you go right below the level of arguing to what the person's assumptions are, you'll find that their assumptions are very different than yours. And that's when you focus on the assumptions, what can emerge out of that is the layer below that, which is the story that they're telling themselves about themselves and the world. And if you get down to that level of story, that's where the real fruitful interaction comes from. And in the context of climate, the climate crisis, what I often find is again, the people that we have greatest difficulty with are people who are just more traumatized than we are.
Yeah.
And when you get down to the level of their story, which is a relational issue, right? You'll just find that, you'll end up finding endless fuel for compassion there, because generally, and when I'm talking with loggers and ranchers and things like that, like the way that they relate to the world and in their communities and to nature is sort of fraught with pain. and suffering. And so when you get to that level of someone who has been raised on a ranch and from an early age, taught to kill anything that moves that, that they can't make money off of. And yet they think of themselves as like maybe hunters, and that's how they relate to the world is being out in nature and hunting, and how much they enjoy being in nature. And all of a sudden you find, oh, there's something common here,
Mm.
So I think it's a really fruitful question, especially as a Dharma practitioner, to just avoid arguing. There's just no point in a lot of our political argument. And you see where that leads is this incredible polarization that we have in our culture.
Yeah.
And we need to learn to not dwell at that level of polarization, but start getting to the levels of assumptions and stories that are underlying that. And that's where we really find it easy to be compassionate. If we're just arguing with people, it's really hard to be compassionate for somebody who doesn't give a shit about, about driving a Humvee or whatever, or eating.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Work.
Thank you so much. That's so right on. So as we move into the next phase here, would love to hear as many voices, or put it in the chat, either just something that was meaningful for you from this time that you'd like to remember, that you carry with you, or to give voice to a dedication. And since we've heard from a lot of guys on in this phase of it, I'd just invite some of our sisters to step forward and share your voice as we begin with this, and then the guys can kind of follow in after that. Also, if you'd like to be on our email list, then just stay in touch with us. I'll put our email again in the chat. Send us an email, and we'll just add you to our list, and you'll know what we're doing in the future. So for now, jewels to remember, dedications to share, just I think speak up or just raise a hand and go for it.
Our camera doesn't seem to be working today for some reason. We're on a different
It's okay,
machine.
Bunny, just speak then.
Oh, yeah, the difference between empathy and compassion fatigue for me was right on, because that's the biggest issue I had faced in doing sustainable activism. There's with various different causes. At a certain point, you burn out and need to look away. So using compassion as the fuel to conquer empathy burnout is really great. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you go to some of our links in the website, there's a bit more narrative on that as well. So thank you for that, Bunny. So good to have you here. Other voices?
Joel, there are some voices in the chat if you would like to read them aloud.
Okay, Diane, I appreciate the reminder of being with stillness and trusting wisdom and guidance to action to emerge from there. And Iris, if you'd like to just read anything that's in the chat that catches your eye, that would be great. And other voices are welcome live as well.
Yeah, I'd like to read, I'd like to read from Jen Grant. Thank you. I'm in Toronto and our province is still in lockdown. I've been feeling overwhelmed and worried by how distracted people are and how much fear there is. What I am leaving with today is feeling supported, grounded, and hopeful again. Thank you, everyone, for your bright lights.
Thanks, Jen. Jen, were you in one of the retreats we did in Toronto?
Hi, Joel. Yes, I am, or was. I'm in Paul Baranowski's Sangha.
Yeah, that's great. So good to see you again. You look familiar. I didn't realize that that's where it was from. Our thoughts are with you and all of our friends in Toronto. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other treasures you carry with you, or dedications to offer? And Jordan, I'd say from your side is or Iris, from your side, whenever it's time to wrap it up, just wrap it up. We'll just hear whatever voices we can, and then I'll let you tie the bow on it. Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to read something from Dennis. Dedication to all the peacemakers in Israel and Palestine, shining a light on the pathway of true love. And I see that that Kevin O'Hara has his hand up. If you'd like to unmute.
Thanks, Iris. Joel, deep blessing and deep bow for your teaching today. Just very quickly, what I always get from your sessions in the Sangha is the interconnection and interbeing. If we bring that together with us, not just ancestors, but connecting with other Sanghas and other groups, I do think that's how change will happen personally. We don't need to reach the unreachables, the diehard people, because all we need is that critical mass, that 30, 40% of people. And even a small group like this, we can connect to 10, 20, 30 different groups to our students. I teach a huge amount of Asian students, for example. If we can get the message across and the different islands of both spiritual groups, certain religious groups, and obviously environmental groups, those alone, if they can unite, can really have a massive spread and influence. A deep bow to your teachings.
Thank you, Kevin. So good to have you joining us here from Ireland. So,
I just wanted to thank you for sharing the concept of empathy fatigue and how it's not compassion fatigue. And in fact, that compassion is actually the remedy. And that's such a big game changer for me. And I really appreciate every time you share that. It's such a beautiful, wonderful understanding.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a very profound point, which I think if it was more deeply understood in our culture would be profound. The relationship between mindful presence, empathic resonance, and moving into compassionate engagement is tremendously profound.
Oh, Joel, would you like to offer a dedication at this point?
Okay. So, yeah, let's reach up and touch our hearts for a moment and just embrace the flow of all the goodness, the energy, the inspiration that's flowing and glowing in the clear space of our vastitude, clear space of our hearts and minds. And just as we breathe, to gather whatever goodness that we find here, like waves of light, and as we gather that light, to shine it into the continuum of our consciousness as an energy and a light that will carry with us forevermore. It can never be lost within the continuum of our being. And to breathe and to gather this light and this goodness, and then as we do, to reach out as though each of us are sitting in a circle together, and we're actually reaching out with our hands and holding hands with each other. And as we do, to envision that we can just radiate and share whatever goodness, pour our goodness, our light through each other's hands, and it flows through all of our hands and all of our hearts, all the way around the circle. And as we breathe in, to gather this goodness into us, to really feel deep gratitude for that, and then add our blessings and light to this. Each of us will carry each other's light, goodness, and blessings with us as we journey on from here. And then to open the portal of our heart as we gather this light and this goodness, and let this light and this goodness flow from our hearts into the hearts, minds, bodies, deepest dimensions of all beings we share our hearts with. Just pouring some of this light into them like a gentle breeze that flows into their sails, like a light that flows from our heart into their hearts. Trusting that each and every one we share this blessing and dedication with will receive this however they most need at this time, to awaken to their wholeness and their fullness and the truth of their They're amazing beings. And as we breathe and receive and gather this goodness and light, to let this flow from the portal of our hearts into the hearts of all beings everywhere, into the earth, into the sky, into the hearts and minds and consciousness continuums of all beings in this time and in all times, in this world and in all worlds, in the earth and the sky and the oceans, in the subtle realms. So that as we prepare to depart from this circle and carry this light and this goodness with us, that every one of the 21,600 breaths that we may breathe in the day to come has the potential for us to be more mindful of being in this communion, of receiving and gathering light and strength and offering it, shining that forth as blessings, as goodness, as mercy, compassion, as love, for the benefit of all beings. Let us just bow to each other and honor the gift of the intimacy and the deep, deep space we shared together. And let us carry this great goodness with us as we dance on into the rest of this day and share this with everyone we meet along the way. Thank you again, Iris, Ken, Jordan, everybody who's been a part of this.